Just imagine this. A highly trained soldier is sent on a dangerous mission by his own government, only to discover that the people he trusted were planning to sacrifice him. And the worst part? They don't just want him dead. They want the entire world to believe he was a traitor. Today, we're following the story of a soldier who is framed for an assassination he never committed, hunted by the entire country, and forced to uncover conspiracy buried deep inside the government. But before he can clear his name, he'll have to survive the people who created the entire setup. The story begins with Bob and his partner Donnie, who are deep inside a desert on a dangerous mission. After successfully destroying an enemy truck, they believe the mission is finally over and prepare to leave. But just when they think they are safe, a massive group of enemies suddenly surrounds them and launches a brutal attack. Bob immediately grabs his weapon and starts firing with incredible precision, taking down enemy soldiers one after another. But the situation quickly turns into chaos as explosions begin going off all around them. With enemies closing in from every direction, Bob desperately contacts the CIA and asks for backup. But there's one problem. The CIA doesn't answer, and that silence is about to cost Bob everything. With no support coming, Donnie is caught in the attack and killed. Bob watches his closest friend die, and something inside him snaps. Filled with rage, he turns his weapon toward a helicopter and starts firing. Several shots miss, but Bob refuses to stop. Finally, one of his shots hits its target, and the helicopter comes crashing down. But what Bob doesn't know yet is that this battle will haunt him for the next 3 years. 3 years later, everything has changed. Bob has disappeared from military life and is now living quietly in the mountains with his dog, trying to forget the past. But peace doesn't last forever. One day, Colonel Isaac suddenly arrives at Bob's home with a mission that could drag him straight back into the world he escaped from. The colonel asks Bob to create a plan to assassinate the president. But there's a catch. Bob isn't supposed to kill the president. Instead, he's supposed to figure out how an assassination could happen and help stop it. The colonel explains that they have received secret intelligence suggesting that someone is preparing to assassinate the president. They need an expert who can predict the attack before it happens, and Bob is the best person for the job. Bob refuses at first. He wants nothing to do with the government anymore. But before leaving, Colonel Isaac gives him all the information they have. Bob spends a long time thinking about it, and eventually decides to help. He begins investigating every location where the president is scheduled to speak. He studies the buildings, the roads, the possible sniper positions, and every possible escape route. After putting everything together, Bob reaches a conclusion. The attack will happen in Philadelphia. Bob tells Johnson what he has discovered. Johnson thanks him and asks him to be there on the day of the speech so he can help protect the president. Meanwhile, Bob meets another former soldier, Michael Sander, who is also supposed to help with the operation. Everything appears to be going according to plan. But on the day of the president's speech, Bob is about to discover that the real plan has nothing to do with protecting the president. Bob, Johnson, and the rest of the team enter a room with a perfect view of the entire area. The president finally steps onto the stage. Bob immediately starts watching the surroundings. Then he realizes something. The timing is perfect for an attacker. Bob warns the team that if someone is planning to shoot the president, this is exactly when they would strike. He tells them to get the president off the stage immediately. But before anyone can react, a police officer suddenly turns his weapon toward Bob and fires. And at that exact moment, an unknown gunman shoots the president. For a few seconds, everything becomes chaos. Bob instantly realizes what's happening. He has been set up. Someone has created a situation where it looks like he is the assassin. Without wasting another second, Bob smashes through the window and escapes. And the moment is gone, Johnson and his team begin cleaning up the evidence. They leave behind only the things they want investigators to find: Bob's sniper rifle and his fingerprints. Now, as far as the authorities are concerned, Bob isn't the man who tried to stop the assassination. He's the man who committed it. Meanwhile, an FBI agent named Nick catches up with Bob and tries to stop him. But Bob easily overpowers him, ties him to a railing, and steals his car. Before driving away, Bob tells Nick something that makes him question everything. "I didn't shoot the president. They are framing me." Then Bob disappears. Within minutes, the entire city is searching for him. Police cars flood the streets, and helicopters begin scanning the area from above. Bob knows that if they catch him, he may never get the chance to prove his innocence. So he makes a desperate move. He drives straight into a car wash. Inside, he quickly grabs a first aid kit from the back seat and treats his injuries before getting back onto the road. But the police are already closing in. Soon, Bob is completely surrounded. There is nowhere to run, and every escape route is blocked. So Bob does something nobody expects. He throws the car into reverse and drives straight into a canal. The police search the area, but when they finally reach the vehicle, they find only an empty car. Bob has already escaped. He climbs out of the canal, finds a truck, and hides inside it to get away. Meanwhile, the media has already decided his fate. Every news channel is showing Bob's face and presenting him as a man responsible for the assassination attempt. And while Bob is being hunted, FBI agent Nick is being humiliated for letting him escape. His boss tears into him, but Nick refuses to stay quiet. He tells his boss exactly what Bob said, that he never fired the fatal shot and that someone is framing him. His boss doesn't believe a word of it and orders him not to include that theory in his report. But Nick isn't convinced. Something about the entire case doesn't feel right. That night, Bob arrives at a huge store. Knowing someone could recognize him, he first cuts the power and plunges the place into darkness. Then he quietly collects the supplies he needs and disappears. After that, he secretly enters a mechanic's shop and treats his injuries. Meanwhile, Nick is assigned to phone duty after being humiliated by his superiors. Then a woman who works at the mechanic shop calls him. She believes Bob may have been there earlier. Nick immediately takes the information seriously and tells his boss. But once again, his boss refuses to listen. Nick, however, refuses to give up. He spends the entire night investigating the case on his own. And the next morning, Galindo gives him a piece of information that changes everything. The police officer who fired at Bob during the assassination has been murdered. Suddenly, Nick's theory starts looking less like a theory and more like the truth. At the same time, Bob disguises himself as a mechanic and visits Sarah, Donnie's widow. Bob and Sarah had never actually met before. But after Donnie's death, Bob had written her a letter and sent her flowers every year in memory of his friend. That's why Sarah remembers him. She has also seen Bob on the news, so she hesitates to let him inside. But Bob eventually convinces her. And once he enters, Sarah tells him something that completely changes the case. The president is alive and perfectly fine. The person who was actually shot at the meeting was a leader from another country. Suddenly, Bob realizes the entire operation was a carefully constructed lie. While Bob is learning the truth, Nick continues investigating the crime scene. He checks the buildings around the area and discovers something important: marks left behind by a sniper tripod. Back at Sarah's house, Bob receives another devastating piece of information. The government has even shot his dog. Bob is furious. He tells Sarah that he will clear his name, no matter how far he has to go. But clearing his name isn't enough anymore. Bob believes the same people could destroy someone else's life tomorrow, and he knows Nick might be the only person capable of exposing them. So Bob creates a plan to contact him. Sarah agrees to help and gives Bob Donnie's rifle. Following Bob's plan, Sarah meets Nick at a cafe and gives him information about Bob's vehicle. Nick immediately starts investigating it, and that's exactly what Bob wanted. But there's one problem. The more Nick investigates, the more nervous Johnson becomes. Johnson learns about Nick's actions and orders his men to watch him closely. Eventually, they get their opportunity. Nick is kidnapped. Johnson's men try every possible method to discover how much Nick knows. But Nick refuses to tell them anything. And just when they are about to kill him, Bob arrives. In a flash, Bob saves Nick's life. Nick tells Bob that he wants to help him through the legal system. But Bob has a different goal. He wants revenge. Because even if he clears his name, the people behind this conspiracy could simply choose another victim. Bob saved Nick's life, and now Nick is ready to help him uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Johnson discovers something else. Bob sends flowers to Sarah every year. That makes Sarah their next target. Johnson sends his men to kidnap her. At the same time, Bob and Nick visit a weapons expert named Mr. 8. And what he tells him reveals just how carefully the assassination was planned. Mr. 8 explains a technique known as paper patching. It can make a bullet fired from one gun appear to have come from another location. In other words, the evidence can be manipulated to make an innocent person look guilty. Mr. 8 also reveals that, apart from Bob, Only one other person has the skill necessary to carry out such a mission. He describes a man's appearance, and Bob immediately knows who he's talking about. Sander. Nick calls his boss and gets Sander's location. But what they don't know is that Johnson has deliberately allowed them to find it. It's a trap. Later that night, Johnson's men break into Sarah's home to capture her. Sarah manages to take one of them down, but another man manages to overpower her. Meanwhile, Bob and Nick arrive at Sander's location. They stop at a hardware store and collect the equipment they need to build a bomb. Bob already suspects that they are walking straight into another trap. So before moving forward, he teaches Nick how to use a sniper rifle. When the time comes, Nick hides in the grass and carefully watches the area. He tells Bob where every guard is positioned. Bob then takes them down one by one. Before entering the building, he secretly plants bombs around the area. Finally, Bob enters the hideout, and surprisingly, Sander isn't shocked to see him. Instead, he calmly begins revealing the truth. Sander explains that Johnson betrayed him in exactly the same way he betrayed Bob. The assassination plan was never about protecting the president. The real target was always the leader of another country. That leader was preparing to expose what Johnson and his army had done to an entire village, a village they had destroyed 3 years earlier. And suddenly, Bob understands the truth about his own mission. The CIA didn't abandon him and Donnie by accident. They left them there because they were never supposed to come back alive. Sander then reveals that Johnson has used many other soldiers in the same way, sacrificing them whenever it benefits him. But before Bob can process everything, Nick warns him that soldiers are surrounding the building. Sander gives Bob another shocking piece of information. Sarah is now in Johnson's hands. Bob knows he has to act fast. Nick activates the bombs outside, and Bob begins fighting his way through the soldiers. Explosions erupt around them as Bob moves through the smoke, taking down one enemy after another. Nick also uses a sniper rifle to eliminate several soldiers and gives Bob a clear path to escape. Then another threat appears, a helicopter. But this time, Bob is ready. Bob and Nick run at full speed, deliberately leading the helicopter toward the area where Bob planted his explosives. The helicopter follows them, and the moment it reaches the trap, Bob presses a detonator. Boom! The explosion destroys the helicopter. After escaping, Nick calls his boss and tells him that he is with Bob. But this isn't a mistake. It's part of Bob's plan. He wants Johnson to hear about it. And soon, the phone rings. Johnson is calling. Bob gives him an offer, Sarah in exchange for Sander's recording. The recording contains Sander explaining how Johnson destroyed an entire village for an oil company. Johnson has spent years hiding that crime, and now Bob has something that could expose everything. Desperate to protect his secret, Johnson agrees to the deal. They decide to meet on a snowy mountain. Johnson, McCaw, and one of their men arrive with Sarah. Everything appears calm. Then a man walks toward them. Johnson's hidden sniper immediately fires. The man drops. Johnson thinks the problem is solved, but he has just fallen into Bob's trap. The man they shot is Nick, and underneath his jacket is a thick metal plate that protects him from a bullet. Now Bob knows exactly where the hidden sniper is. Without hesitation, Bob takes the sniper down. He then shoots the man holding Sarah hostage. But there's another surprise waiting. Nick had already sent the FBI a letter explaining what was about to happen at the meeting. Bob steps out into the open, while Nick has already taken away everyone's weapons. Sarah grabs a gun and kills a man who kidnapped and tortured her. Bob helps her regain control before confronting McCaw. McCaw tells Bob the truth. They never came there to negotiate. They came to kill him. And then he says something even more disturbing. Even if Bob releases a recording, it won't change anything. The corruption inside the government goes much deeper than Bob realizes. By now, Bob understands that McCaw may actually be telling the truth. So instead of handing over the recording, Bob burns it right in front of them. But just when it seems like the truth will disappear forever, the FBI arrives and arrests everyone. A few days later, Bob is brought to Washington, D.C., where he stands before the Attorney General and several senior FBI officials. Nick, Johnson, and Sarah are also present. Bob asks them to bring out the rifle recovered from the crime scene, because he is finally ready to prove that he was never the assassin. Before leaving his house, Bob had removed the firing pins from the rifle. That means the weapon could not possibly have fired the shot that supposedly killed the target from such a long distance. To demonstrate this, Bob points the rifle at Nick and pulls the trigger from nearby. Nothing happens. The evidence is undeniable. The Attorney General accepts it and clears Bob of the assassination charge. But there is still one problem. Bob's accusations against Johnson and McCaw cannot be accepted because there is no solid evidence against them. It looks like they are going to get away with everything. But Bob isn't finished. A few days later, Johnson and McCaw are relaxing at a mountain house, believing their problems are finally over. They don't know that Bob is already watching them. He's waiting for the perfect moment. And this time, he's not coming to expose them. He's coming for revenge. Bob attacks the mountain house and takes down the corrupt men one by one. Once everyone is dead, he shoots a gas pipe as he leaves. A massive explosion tears through the building, destroying the evidence and making sure there is nothing left behind that can be used against him. Finally, Bob escapes and meets Sarah. After everything they've been through, the two decide to leave the past behind and start a completely new life together. And just like that, the soldier who was once branded a traitor finally walks away from the conspiracy that nearly destroyed him. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to Deep Explainer, and stay tuned for the next movie explanation. Because sometimes, the person everyone calls a traitor is actually the only one who knows the truth.